Good afternoon, quilters. My name is Maryann, and I'm going to show you how to do the log cabin block this week. It's a really interesting quilt block because when the slaves were trying to escape slavery, they were making their way up to Canada, and they used quilt blocks made out of old clothing, burlap bags, anything they could find to make symbols for the other slaves that were trying to escape. So they used quilt blocks to give directions to everybody. The log cabin that we're going to do today has a center block, which traditionally is red, and the red meant that there was a place where they could stay overnight and rest, and it was a safe place. It was warm, there might have been a fireplace and all. And then the other strips just circle around it. Usually half the block is light and the other half is dark. And the other thing I wanted to tell you is when you're cutting the strips, you should cut them on the same grain all the time. Whether you're doing the vertical or the horizontal grain, you should use the same grain each time. Log cabin I'm showing you is going to be a little bit different. I wanted it to come out to a 12.5-inch block because once we get several of these blocks made, we will put it into a quilt. So all the blocks are going to be 12.5-inch before they're put into the quilt, and they'll turn into a 12-inch block when you take the seams. All your seams are going to be 1/4 inch. So this is the diagram of the log cabin that we're going to do today. I already cut out a couple of the pieces. This is my center block, the red square. And then I have some of the strips cut out, but not all of them, so I can show you as we go along. We'll start out with the dark side. And we're going to sew. This is my center. This is the 2-inch square. We're going to sew onto the side of it. So I'll do that now. And every time you sew a piece together, another strip on, you should actually iron it because that'll keep the shape and make it turn into a much nicer block if you do it that way. I mentioned last time that there's a foot called a 1/4-inch foot. And that's what I'm using right now. If you lay your fabric right along the blade there, you'll get a perfect 1/4-inch seam. Normally when you press blocks, you would press them to the darker side. Okay. Strip off these threads here. So now we have the center block and this next piece done. The third piece is going to go across the top. The next piece that you sew on always goes next to the one that you just sewed. And we're going to go around in a clockwise direction here. So we did 1 and 2, and we're going to go around this way. So we're going to do number 3 now. I'm making sure that the edges meet, and I'm putting them good side to good side. Sometimes the piece you cut might come out a little tiny bit longer than the previous piece. Here's an example. It's not very off, but you can see there's a little bit of yellow showing. You just leave that on. You can either leave it on and it'll be fine when you make your block, or you can cut it off, when you do the next piece. Again, we're going to set the seam first, and then we're going to iron it open. Okay, we're ready for the fourth piece. Oops. 1, 2, 3, yeah. Which is going to come along this side because we just did this one. Again, we're gonna iron it before we open the piece up. That's called setting the seam. And then we're going to go ahead and press it. And I always check the back before I put the next piece on to make sure that the seam isn't turning on itself. Okay, we're up to number 5, which is a 6.5 inch piece. There's a little bit of a difference in the end here, a little bit that I sticking out, which I don't like, so I'm going to just go ahead and even it out a little bit before I sew the next piece on. And if you'll notice, each time I'm putting another piece on, I'm flipping it, I'm turning it in a counterclockwise. Again, there's a tiny little discrepancy here, so I try to even out the block as I go along so that it makes it a nice square block when I'm done. The next strip we're gonna use is an 8-inch strip. There are a lot of different ways to make the log cabin block. It's not always made like this. Sometimes the strips are put at a different configuration. You can look on YouTube or any of the quilting areas online, and you get lots of different suggestions on what you can do with this block. It's a very easy traditional block that people have used for a long time. It always helps too to have a nice sharp blade on your rotary cutter. The log cabin block is also a really good way if you're a quilter and you have a lot of scraps, because you can make the 2-inch strips and you can use them in different combinations, different color schemes. Some people like to make them all bright, some people like to make them a little bit less bright, so you can do a lot with this block. Setting the seams and now pressing it out towards the outside. The log cabin block actually can have a different number of strips. This one's going to have 13 strips on it, 13 strips counting the block in the middle. So 12 strips in the block in the middle. And as I mentioned before, traditionally the log cabin's made with dark strips on one side and light strips on the other, but I'm making all of these with tans and related fabrics without any light side per se. Just to let you see how it looks if you do it without doing the light and dark. It's always really important to iron each strip as you put it on too, instead of waiting to the end. trying to make sure my edges match. This 1/4 inch foot is great for making sure that your seams are all the same width. Most of your sewing machines will come with a 1/4 inch foot now, the newer models, but if you don't have one, you can usually buy one online or at a sewing store to fit your machine. One of the first things I learned when I started to quilt was to measure twice and cut once, so you don't have to start all over again by cutting it wrong. Finish it up, but you're getting the idea, I'm sure, about how to rotate the block to do the next piece. Okay, I'm gonna press this out and then I'm gonna show you a little bit more. I can't put the last 2 pieces on because I cut them incorrectly before I came, but you're getting the idea of it, and I'm left-handed, so I may be rotating the block a different direction than you do. You can always turn it clockwise or counterclockwise, as long as you consistently do the same thing each time. Always press each strip as you put it on. Make sure that you have everything caught. Make sure all your seams are nice. I'll show you one little boo-boo I made here, right here. This seam is going down a little bit. It caught the piece. I probably wouldn't do anything to fix that one unless it was like a big error. You can hardly see that one. But I do check my sewing each time that I do it. So once you get this done, if I had the other 2 rows on, it would turn into a 12.5 inch block. And then when you sew it into a quilt, because you're taking a 1/4 inch off on each side, you've got a 12 inch block. And the reason I picked this size block is because all the other blocks that I'm going to show you will be 12 inch blocks. So I wanted to make this a little bit bigger than some of them that you see online. You can make them into 8 inch, 9 inch, whatever, but I wanted this one to be a little bit bigger. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on making a log cabin block. The other thing I want to call to your attention, I told you usually half the block is white or lights and half is dark. I chose to do mine with all these fabrics just to see what it would come out like. Normally I would do half on the lights and half in the dark. And when you put the half light and half dark into a quilt, you can make so many pretty patterns because of the way you rotate it. Very nice block to make. And the other blocks I show you in the next couple sessions are going to be blocks that, as I said, the slaves used as a way to tell other slaves which way to go and where a safe house was, and very interesting history. This concludes today's session, and you can join me next time. We'll be doing another block that the slaves used to use, and in the end, we'll end up with 12 blocks that we put into a quilt. Thank you for listening.